Understanding the role of network segmentation and access control.
Thank you, and may I have your name with spelling, please?
Matthew, Matthew, Gale, Gale.
Thank you, sir. I'll place you into the network segmentation and access control call now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome to the Network Segmentation and Access Control conference call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question and answer session. Instructions will be given at that time. If you should require assistance during the call, please press star and then 0. Today's call is also being recorded. I would now like to turn the conference over to Mr. Abi Abokola. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Cody. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Brandmark session for the ITI. We'll be speaking on the topic titled Understanding the Role of Network Segmentation and Access Control in Helping Our Clients Secure Their Critical Data and Infrastructure. We're going to have two facilitators for today, Don O'Neill and Bengal Assisi. I would like them to introduce themselves. Don, can you go ahead?
Sure. Thanks, Avi. Can you go ahead and go into presentation mode for everybody? My name is Don O'Neill. I'm the director in IT infrastructure with a primary focus on network and infrastructure security. And we've been doing a lot of work in the last couple of years around network security and securing the infrastructure associated with a lot of different companies. And what we want to do is share the stories with you today, how what we've built into a practice here can help other clients, and the importance of that throughout all industries that PwC helps address. Benga, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Bengal Assisi. I'm a director in IT in specifically Microsoft. I have been in this industry for about 16 years, doing infrastructure-related work, especially around network architecture and especially around security and segmentation. I will be co-leading this presentation today with Dan. Over to you, Dan.
Okay, thank you.
Can everybody see the phone?
I can see that everybody else is on mute, Avi, so nobody else.
Okay, okay, just want to make sure that you can see the presentation.
Yeah, we can.
All right.
So why don't you go ahead and move on to our first slide, Avi, and we'll just get started, and we'll kind of introduce what's going on in the world here. So when you think about breach from a cybersecurity point of view, and you think about how data loss happens in an environment, it's pretty much a common thread. Either unauthorized users or unauthorized devices are connected to or gain access to a client network, and that could be through any number of
will be with you shortly. If you're a speaker or will be presenting today, please alert the conference specialist. You may be asked to provide a confirmation.
Thank you for standing by. May I have your conference code or title, please?
Conference code is 739-871906.
What is the title of the call?
Understanding the role of network segmentation and access control.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. May I have your name with spelling?
Matthew Gale, Matthewgale.
I'm sorry, Gale with the last name?
Correct.
Okay, thanks. I'll place you in your call.
The ways that an attacker or a hacker or a malicious entity can gain access to an organization are many-factored. They can come in through the internet. They can come in through WAN connections where they've got a business-to-business connectivity, or they've got remote offices, or they've got vendors and contractors who are connecting in to do valid work, but somebody within that organization may not be so nice. They can come in through the LAN on corporate users' desktops and laptops. You know, somebody takes a laptop home, hooks it up to their home internet connection, gets a virus on it, and then they bring it back to the company, and guess what? Now that virus can potentially spread throughout the organization, and that virus could be carrying some sort of a malware or spyware payload. Connecting through BYOD, which is the biggest trend these days in corporate connectivity, is people bringing their own phones, their own tablets, their own laptops, their own devices, and connecting to the network. They can come in through business partner connections, through the MSP. You think about a lot of companies going out and outsourcing to cloud vendors or managed service providers to provide data center connectivity and services. A lot of those services are shared amongst multiple users. You cannot necessarily rely on the vendor who's providing that connectivity and that service to be 100% protected. They're going to have an indemnity clause in their clause that says if they're breached, they're not liable for you being breached. Through the wireless LAN, corporate users, guests are a big exposure to the organization. Somebody coming in just saying, hey, I just want wireless internet for the day. I'm coming in to help out with XYZ project, and I need to be able to get access to my email. Again, and that's again a BYOD kind of situation where somebody else is bringing in their own device. You just don't know what's on this device. They could intentionally have put on there some spyware or malware or scanning tools. They can go out and scan the entire environment. And then VPN. People who are connecting via VPN are typically connecting to a non-corporate asset. Via a non-corporate asset, or they're connecting from another company in via somebody else's corporate asset, but not necessarily known to your corporation. And that's another threat that can come in. And then obviously the internet, we talked about a little bit about public and corporate assets and customers and vendors and all the traditional ways you think about protecting an organization with firewalls and IPS and IDS are almost entirely focused on the edge at the internet or at the WAN connectivity. Go ahead and go on to the next slide, please. So if you look at what's happened in the last couple of years, most of the big breaches have come from either an internal source, in the case of Target and Sony, where an organization was breached by a means that they didn't think they needed to even protect. In the case of Target, some contractors came in and connected to some switches that were in an HVAC closet, discovered that the organization had very little security at that edge, and took their time spreading throughout the environment to try to get access to the payment card information. In the case of Michael Stores, a very similar situation where they came in and they attached to where the credit card terminals are, and the same thing happened over at Home Depot. These types of attacks are becoming more and more common as companies protect the one public-facing avenue, being the internet, with more and more firewalls and IPS and IDS, intrusion detection and intrusion protection systems, the hackers are focusing more and more on the non-traditional or less visible ways to get into the organization. So if you think about most companies' situations and networks, when you go into their conference room, there's network jacks on the wall. And 9 times out of 10, and don't quote me on this, but a lot of the times, you can just literally plug into their wall jack and get access to their network. You may not have full access to the network, but you have some access to the network. And a lot of times those networks are not segmented apart from the rest of the users. So you could, if you so desired, start sniffing traffic and seeing what's going on the LAN, at least in that building, and potentially start putting together a map as to what the organization looks like, what the servers look like, what services are inside, what the typical user is doing, what the email servers' IP addresses are, all these good things that hackers love to get. And the problem is that this incidence is continuing on the rise, and it's coming from nation states. It's coming from organized crime. It's coming from insiders, which are much less visible to the organization, because you think you trust your employees or your contractors. You know, they're targeting anything that they can get money out of, and that could be something as simple as somebody's home address, social security number, because it could be sold on the black market for identity theft, or credit card information, or banking information, or health records, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the biggest things that a lot of companies are concerned with is the loss of intellectual property. If you think about somebody who's in the semiconductor industry, for example, their entire business is based on intellectual property. If designs for next generation chips were to leak out to the black market, to other nation states, they could potentially undermine the market, come out with a competing product, clone the product, and as we all know, cloned products on the gray market or in the secondary tier markets is pretty common, and can really affect major players in the marketplace. What's the impact, though, to the customers, to the client? PCI regulations are pretty clear. If you have a breach, you're liable for the cost associated with reimbursing the client for that breach. Target had hundreds of millions of dollars of responsibility involved with their breach. Financial loss, obviously, in the case of Sony had a number of movies that leaked out to the gray market or black market before they were released, and that could mean less ticket sales to them in the end. Brand erosion. I mean, Target is the first that always comes to my mind. For the first 6 months to a year after that breach, there were a lot of people that were concerned about shopping at Target. Is it safe for me to shop at Target? Are they going to is my information going to get stolen again? And then reduced competitiveness. And when you're in that position where people don't go to Home Depot because of the breach last month, they go to Lowe's instead, you're losing market share, you're losing competitiveness. So it's not only from those ancillary points of view, there's a direct responsibility to regulations. If you lose healthcare information, there are fines that can be levied against you via the HIPAA laws. If you lose payment information or PII, there are fines that can be levied against you via the FTC and the PCI regulations. There's a lot of reasons to think about protecting your organization across many aspects within it.
Yeah, if I can just chime in a little into what Don has said, and I think some organizations do a pretty good job protecting their perimeters, from outside actors and the likes of it. But then the really greatest sort of vulnerability is actually insiders, meaning someone who is an employee who has access to intellectual property that they shouldn't be having access to. So imagine that employee going with a corporate-owned asset to a public Wi-Fi location, and some reason download the malware, and a hacker has access to that employee's files. Now you trust that employee; it's coming in through your own corporate asset, but if that employee may just carelessly with the way they're using a corporate asset outside, have some malware on their laptop that allows an hacker to have access into intellectual property. So a lot of organizations, trust their the private owned asset, but not do a good job at protecting sensitive data within their environment. And I have seen that personally in a lot of my clients that they said, yeah, we have our perimeter protected, yet internally anyone who plugs into the system that a trusted employee can have access to anything. And that's a big risk, that can, result in, in a lot of this impact. And if you see it in a lot of, the acts that we've seen recently, it's not necessarily through, coming into the internet. They're coming into their own, HVAC system, for instance. You can trust your HVAC, your own HVAC system. A vendor comes in, plugs into that system. You give that vendor the right to come access your network. But what do they have access to from that HVAC system? And I think that's one of the things, why, network simulation is really, really very important. Over to you, Don.
Okay, thanks. So, Bobby, why don't you go ahead and go on to the next slide here? So as Benga was just stating, that every security initiative within an organization should be a multi-layered approach. You can't just worry about the perimeter. You can't just worry about the things that you know. You can't just worry about addressing segmentation just for PCI purposes or segmentation just for HIPAA or PII reasons. You need to really look at the environment from an end-to-end point of view, from the inside all the way to the outside. There's a number of things that typically are done, like we've stated, to protect the perimeter, but fewer and fewer organizations even consider the inside as a potential source of threat. But in actuality, we're seeing more and more threats coming from the inside through APTs, through attacks directly connected to the network, etc. So if you think about this, really a comprehensive security approach is what's needed for most organizations. And that includes what we're going to talk about here in just a minute. Identifying all of the devices that are connecting to the network, identifying all of the users that are connecting to the network, and providing role-based controls based on who that person is, where that person's connecting, and what kind of device they're connecting through to be able to control the entire environment from end to end on the inside, as well as on the publicly facing spaces at B2B connections, at VPN connections, at internet connections. So that leads us into our first real quick polling question here. Avi, you want to go ahead and pull up the next slide?
Okay, yeah, sure. So, just one additional announcement. 30 minutes to the end of this session, we would open up the lines to participants to ask questions and make comments. So, yeah, I just want to make sure that you guys are aware. They'll be allowed to ask questions. All right? I'm going to go to the next.
And sorry to interrupt you, Avi. In the meantime, if you do have any questions, feel free to post them up to Avi in the chat window, and he can provide them to Benga and myself. And if it's a question we can answer that's directly related to the information we're talking about at the moment, we'll try to address it then, or we'll take it at the end of the session.
Okay. All right. 1 second. Here goes our first quiz. Can everybody see that? Hey, John, can you see that?
Yes, I can. So the first polling question is, how does network segmentation reduce the risk to our clients? So does it provide multiple layers of security and access to the data? Does it protect the network from unauthorized devices accessing it? Does it reduce regulatory footprint? Or does it do all of the above? So if everybody could really quickly answer the poll question. give it here about another 15 or 20 seconds, and then we'll share the results with everybody. Again, how does network segmentation reduce the risk? Okay, Avi, you want to go ahead and share the results with everybody, and we'll see what everybody feels or thinks.
Okay. All right. 1 second.
So the answer is D. It's all of the above. So network segmentation reduces risks by providing multiple layers of security to access the data, protects the network from unauthorized devices and users accessing it, as well as reducing the regulatory footprint. So just to make you sure you understand, does this mean that network segmentation addresses everything? Absolutely not. You still need perimeter security. You still need firewalls. You still need IDS, IPS. The network segmentation is an extra layer of security throughout the entire environment that helps protect everything along with traditional means. Abby, go ahead and go on to the next slide. So what is network segmentation itself? So with a traditional enterprise, most companies that have been around for 15, 20 years, they were around before the days of virtual LANs, which could be built out to provide, or VLANs, which could be built out to provide segmentation in the data center, logically segmenting networks apart. So they would rely on physical network segmentation at the layer 3 level, so a different subnet for a different network and a different routing level that they had to go through. What does that mean for most of us today is that a lot of large organizations don't have any kind of segmentation or separation of data throughout the entire environment. Their users may be on one segment, but then in the data center, most of the infrastructure in the data center is on the same segment. So that means that horizontally through the data center and vertically through the data center, data is flowing pretty easily. Now, traditionally what we would do is we would throw a firewall in there to try to block access to specific kinds of resources, like, for example, a certain classification of servers that are classified as PCI. But we didn't do anything typically around the users. Now, in a data center that has both a user segment and a data center segment, we separate the users out from the data center, we separate them out into different groups, and we separate out individual groups within the data center to provide access and limit access horizontally and vertically, or what's traditionally called east-west and north-south within the data center. East-west is laterally throughout the data center. North-south is in and out of the data center where the users would be accessing the data. Now, traditional segmentation technologies, and what we're talking about today is a more next-generation segmentation technology, would again rely on VLAN segmentation or layer 3 segmentation, and wouldn't provide a very granular control, and definitely wouldn't provide any kind of access restrictions based on identity of the user. Next-generation segmentation, however, takes into account who the user is, what kind of device they're logging into, and how they're accessing the network to provide a set of dynamic controls that are placed at the edge port where they connect, be that a physical wired connection, be that a virtual VPN connection, or be that a wireless connection. So that those rules are then applied to that user based on that device, and they are only having access to the systems and the data in the data center that they are supposed to have access to.
Yeah, and then the other piece of that is that it gives you an audit trail of every activity or all kind of transactions that goes in and out of the network environment. to sensitive data and even not sensitive data. You pretty much, have an understanding of what they're connecting from, where they're connected from, and what they have access to. And you're able to kind of, control what they have access to based on what you think or the user profile of, of that person, accessing your network.
Yep. Bobby, go ahead and go on to the next slide. Okay, so we've talked a lot about traditional segmentation, the traditional VLAN or layer 3, layer 2, layer 3 type of segmentation. A new technology that a lot of you may be hearing about is microsegmentation. And that is taking that same type of approach from a layer 2, layer 3 down into the hypervisor of a virtual environment. Many of our clients are running virtualized environments, some of them at 90% best or better, some of them not so much. Microsegmentation is typically applied in that area. And then a third area that's been coming up in the market is application security. This is trying to provide that next level of control based on identity. So an appliance or a set of controls will be put in place somewhere in the stream between the user and the data center and the resources that they're accessing. And based on that user's identity, a set of dynamic controls will be put on that application, either at a software level in the data center in front of the application or at a hardware level or appliance level somewhere within the stream. And there's a number of companies that are addressing application security, and there's a number of solutions that are being addressed in the microsegmentation place. But you can see here we still have gaps. If you were to do all three of these, you still have gaps. You still don't know who's all connecting to the network. You still don't have the ability to keep unauthorized devices from off the network because you don't know what's on the network. And that's where network access control and the next generation segmentation technologies that are based on NAC or 802.1x play into this role. Go ahead and go on to the next slide, please.
Okay, just before that, we do have some questions on the chat line. Do you guys want to take few questions, or should we move on?
Sure, we can take questions. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question that says, how does segmentation relate to access to cloud apps? I mean, I really don't understand that, but maybe you guys do.
How does segmentation relate to cloud and
access to cloud applications? So yes. Can you use segmentation to control access to applications you're hosting in your cloud environment?
Yep.
Do you want me to take that, or do you want to take that?
Sure, I'll take that one. So traditionally, a cloud connection is considered an extension, or should be considered an extension of the existing data center. If you use one of the next generation technologies that we'll specifically outline here in a few slides, it will allow you to provide the same kind of controls in the cloud environment as if you did if it was hosted within your same data center. So you'll get the identity-based access to those applications based on roles and groups that are set up in your identity management platform, Active Directory, LDAP, whatever Oracle Identity Manager, whatever the client chooses to use. Now, one of the big challenges within the cloud environment is protecting the east-west traffic within the cloud environment. And that requires a number of different specific tools that are provided by different vendors like Cloudflare and Cisco and any number of different kinds of tools that allow to control the east-west traffic within a data center. But the north-south traffic is still controlled based on identity to and from. Now, Cisco has dedicated, and I'm not calling Cisco out for any favoritism or anything like that, but Cisco has dedicated their cloud services router platform. They want to extend all the capabilities that they have in the data center for controlling based on identity east and west out to the cloud service router platform out at Amazon and at Google and at Azure, just like they do internally. So they have a roadmap to address a lot of the gaps that are out in the cloud market. But there are a lot of gaps, and there are some specific architectural and design choices that can be made to minimize that risk. But today, you don't have 100% of the same control.
And again, it also depends on the kind of architecture you have within the cloud environment, the type of cloud environment you're talking about. Is it a private cloud environment or public cloud environment? So it really depends. But definitely
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, guys. I will take one more question from the chat and we'll move on to the next slide because we have more slides to cover. So the question says, the first one was from Matthew Gill. This one is from Michael McIntosh. How does segmentation protect against unauthorized devices, even that an implementation detail of segmentation and not segmentation itself? If you don't enforce policy for certificates, all the segmentation you would do wouldn't restrict devices. Am I right?
So you are partially correct. So most organizations think about network access control on their wireless segments, but they don't think about network access control on their wired segments. Most organizations, because it's kind of baked into the standard for Wi-Fi, leverage 802.1x and can provide certificates or some sort of identity-based access for wireless devices in the network. But they don't do that on the wired side. And the wired side is a big threat to most organizations. And if you look at the last half a dozen major breaches, they all came through wired segment access, not wireless, not APT, not internet. They all came from wired segment access. So being able to extend that 802.1x capability into the wired side is what we're predominantly talking about here, and kind of blending the two together to keep a single unified management platform so that it's easy to manage the access either on wired or wireless based on the identity of the user and the identity of the device and what they're supposed to be getting access to. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think we have slides, further down in the presentation that really speaks to Mac solution as a whole.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide because that's what we're going to talk about on the next slide.
Let's move on. And if I've read your question so far, that would be time for you to, if you have any if you need any further clarification, then you can do that. All right.
Great. So what does network segmentation and access control do to help our clients? So we just talked about a little bit of this. It provides the ability for the client to know who's on the network or what's on the network. One of the challenges that we come into an organization and they say, our network's pretty flat. We have some firewalls to perimeter, and we ask them, have you done any kind of inventory as to what's on your network? Oh, we've done a couple scans. We don't really have a CMDB, or we do have a CMDB, but we don't know with 100% certainty what's connected to our network. And they go through and they do threat analysis. Our cyber organization might come out and do a penetration test or a threat analysis, and they find out that they have a whole bunch of devices on their network, to no fault of their own, because they're legitimately there, that they weren't aware on their network. Things like thermostats or card readers or cameras, or there's somebody's got an old server sitting underneath their desk that they thought was in the data center and all that kind of stuff. Leveraging 802.1x and network access control allows you to say, you're only allowed to connect to the network if we know who you are. Now, there are different approaches to that, and obviously a company would say, hey, I can't just shut down everything that's connected to the network today because I don't know everything that's connected to the network today. There are ways to kind of migrate into that mode of operation. Now, not only does the NAC and access control provide visibility to what's on the network, it also provides control over where they can go on the network. So you can control lateral movement or east-west movement at the edge. So user-to-user communication. So you can say that just because you've got a laptop over here, it can't talk to the desktop that's on the other end of the building or in some other building. You want to control that east-west traffic at the edge. But you can also control the north-south traffic going in and out of the data center, saying, look, this is a finance user, and this finance user should have access to be able to run reports in the finance system. So I'm going to provide them access to the finance system. Well, this other person is a janitor. He doesn't need to have access to HR. He doesn't need to have access to application development. He doesn't need to have access to production web servers. He doesn't need to have access to finance systems. All he needs to have access to is maybe the internet and the ability to order janitorial supplies through some sort of an ERP system. So why do we provide access free and clear to the whole data center from somebody who's connecting at the edge if we don't know who they are or what they're connecting from? As a result of being able to control what's connecting and who's connecting to what, reduces the regulatory scope. And as a result, the cost associated with becoming regulatory compliant. So if you think about an overall organization that has, say, 10,000 users, and they process credit cards pretty regularly, in an unsegmented, non-identity aware network, everything in the network that hasn't been firewalled away, and we all know firewalls can be very laborious to manage and maintain, everything that hasn't been firewalled away is now in scope for regulatory compliance scanning. So that would mean that, for example, unless you went through and identified the 40 or 50 users that were supposed to have access to the PCI data, the actual credit card information, and put in specific rules for those users that, of course, are static, and manage those rules so that every time a person leaves, or every time a person changes devices, or every time a person moves their desktop or their laptop, or every time they connect on a different type of network, to limit controls, everything is in scope for regulatory scanning. And you can see how laborious a traditional firewall approach or VLAN approach would be to managing that relationship between who has access to data and who doesn't have access to data. Additionally, when you have the granular controls provided by network access control and segmentation of the data center, you can limit your loss and data loss and damage. So like I was saying, somebody who has access to the finance systems should have access to the finance system. Somebody who's not in the finance department should not have access to the finance system. So if you think about more common social engineering approaches to gaining access to corporate resources, they don't go after the CFO to social engineer to get into the finance systems. They go after somebody who's at the edge, maybe an administrative assistant, or maybe an intern, or maybe they go through a janitor or something like that. And if you look at what happened to Target, they didn't have to social engineer anything. They connected to the network, and an HVAC closet had free and clear access to the entire network as a result, because there was no segmentation or controls put in place to control what could connect to the network and where they can go once they were connecting into the network.
Yeah, just kind of, having, recent client experience to what you're saying. We walked into, an energy client, organization, who were, looking into doing segmentation, and they have this concept of something called the crown jewels. They wanted to protect their crown jewel, which is, the critical data infrastructure. And on doing an assessment of the environment, we realized that, even if they put a firewall around their sensitive data, the backup systems where the sensitive data is supposed to touches a lot of other systems within the organization. And that backup system is not behind the firewall. Those data are not being encrypted. You have credit card information, financial information, all mixed up in one single box that everybody has access to. So no matter what you do in terms of either firewalls or any kind of segmentation approach to protect the so-called crown jewel without necessarily protecting the inroads into their network and who has access to it, they're still kind of too much exposed to loss of sensitive data. That's you, Anton.
Thank you. So go on to the next slide for me, please. So what are some of the benefits and risks of leveraging network access control, or 802.1x, for segmentation at the edge and at the data center, as well as for combining that with more traditional segmentation technologies and also some additional next-generation technology? So one of the major benefits of using NAC is it's a non-disruptive technology. It can be deployed into an environment with little or no impact. Well, I would say little because there's always a possibility, but little or no impact to the user base as it exists today, and can be put into what's called monitor mode. So you can actually start monitoring what's connecting to your network, where people are going, what they're doing, how are they accessing the network, what kind of devices are they accessing, what times of day, where are the things that they're trying to access, you can start putting together that whole entire profile and visibility of your organization without ever putting a single control in place. Now, it's important wanted to state that obviously any kind of network access control that's based on 802.1x requires equipment that supports 802.1x. Well, if any organization has put equipment in place in the last 10 plus years, they have the ability to do 802.1x. And especially on the wireless side, it's baked into the standard, like I was saying. Once they've identified everything that's on their network, they can start controlling the data paths in the network. And this control is typically done through downloadable access control lists that are placed on the physical or virtual port where the user is connecting. So rather than relegating the control all the way up to a firewall that sits at the edge of the data center, we're going to push that control all the way down to the port where the user connects and all the way up to the port where the server connects, so that a set of ACLs that are dynamically downloadable are based on that particular user's access rights and the way they are supposed to be accessing the network and the resources. So that set of ACLs can be based on any number of things. It could be based on time of day. It could be based on geography and location. It can be based on that particular person's role or groups that they may be living in within Active Directory. It could be based on calendar day. For example, people who are normally running reports during the busiest time of the year, everybody else is supposed to stay out of the finance systems. We can actually put controls in place that forces everybody to stay out of financial systems for a day or two if you chose to do that. And it provides that controls where I was talking about before about identifying and making sure that the devices that are on the edge are known to the organization. So keeping that non-supported equipment off the corporate network is really important. You know, devices that are unknown to IT are going to have a very high risk of probability for breach or APT or exposure to the organization. Somebody who comes in and plugs into your conference room and a wall jack in the conference room with their own personal laptop could have some sort of sniffing software on there going through on that, trying to identify what's in the network. You don't know who that person is. It could be a security guard that's wandering the halls late at night, protecting your organization from physical theft. But little did you know that they happen to be, setting you up for virtual theft. And it's important to be able to block those connections. Not only having that visibility of what's connecting, but having the visibility of what's actually transpiring on the network is an important aspect of 802.1x. You can, if you chose to, log every packet request, every connection request, every socket request, every kind of request that goes to and from a particular client. That's invaluable when you're trying to do application debugging testing. That's invaluable when you're trying to do breach analysis. That's invaluable when you're trying to figure out if a user is really supposed to have access to a particular server, or if a particular server is supposed to have access to other servers to do its job. And that information is very, very important, and it's fed into any number of SIEM solutions, security incident monitoring solutions, to be able to give visibility and alerting to the organization when something's going wrong. Now, not only are we putting those downloadable ACLs on the edge, if you think about it, we're really decentralizing the load associated with controlling the environment. So we don't have to necessarily have a giant, big, fat, 100 gigabit capable firewall at the edge of the data center to control 10,000 users, because we have 10,000 user reports. They're all going to take a small piece of that load and distribute it out throughout the entire environment. Now, the control is distributed as far as blocking the access to the data and controlling what users have access to. The management of the environment is not decentralized. It's actually centralized. And traditionally, we would centralize it through the use of Active Directory groups or other kind of identity management, adding the servers and the users into specific groups and mapping those groups to access rights and access controls, so that next time a new user is added, or if somebody needs to have new access to a new server, they're literally just added to a user group within, or a group within Active Directory, and magically a new downloadable ACL shows up on their port, and they know, and nobody in security or networking has to go through and tweak a million firewalls and a million firewall rules to make access possible for that user or for that device or for that server. It's centrally managed with decentralized control. Now, if you think about this, what does this really mean? This is really a path to software-defined networking. This is the first step in making your entire environment from a security point of view dynamic, software-defined. You don't have to go through and, like I stated, control a bunch of firewall rules independent of the users. It's really a set of rules that follow the user based on their identity or follow the device based on their identity. Now, there are a few implementation risks, just like any other program. You have a potential interruption of end-user services or server services. When you go through that first phase of doing the monitoring and you're looking at what's on the network and who's connecting and all that kind of stuff, if you happen to create rules that knock off users when you lock things down, then that's a risk. If you happen to have a new server that's brought up online and it wasn't assigned a proper security group tag or wasn't assigned a proper identity access group within Active Directory, then you're not going to be able to get access to that until that's corrected. But it has a far lower risk of interrupting data than it does if you were to put a brand new firewall in at the edge of your data center where you physically have to move everything over and control and worry about one point to choke that could potentially take down the entire organization. Again, it's a distributed controls. And if you have an issue with a particular set of users, you can open up that particular set of users' access rights. You don't have to open up everybody's access rights. If you look at the way a traditional firewall debugging session goes, when somebody says there's a problem with the firewall, what's the first thing they do? They go and they put in an IP any statement to allow all traffic to flow through the firewall so they can start debugging and looking at the logs and seeing where the fault is. Well, if you're using NAC and 802.1x, you can essentially do that same kind of control, but only to that classification of user or only to that one user. So you can debug it in a much finer grained point of view. That leads us into our second quiz question here. Avi, if you want to go ahead and bring up the next quiz. So when combined, the network access control and segmentation limit access to sensitive data based on users' roles. Go ahead and start the poll on that. Is that true or false? Avi, did you start the poll? There we go. A minute to answer the question if everybody can go through and think about this. We've got about 15 minutes or so of important information to go through, and then we'll open it up to questions at the end. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to send those over to Avi, and we will answer them at the end, or we'll open the lines up for questions at the end. We've got about 20 seconds left on this poll question. Okay, let's reveal the answer.
Yep.
Yes, most of you got it correct. When combined, they do indeed limit access to sensitive data based on user roles. So again, it's important to realize that you're controlling the edge, but you also need to have traditional segmentation approaches, VLANs, layer 2, layer 3 boundaries in the data center. They're also controlled via other next generation segmentation rules to control access to the data center, east-west as well as north-south. So moving on to the next slide here. Avi, can you go on to the next slide, please?
Can you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Can you see my screen? Yes, we can. Don, can you see the screen? Okay.
Yeah, I can, but we're stuck on quiz number 2. We need to go to the next slide.
Oh, he's on the next slide.
I'm on the next slide. Maybe your system is stuck on the next on the quiz.
He's on the next slide. Talking about market leaders in NAC solutions.
Okay, I'm stuck on quiz number 2. So, there it goes. There it goes. So, who are the players in the market that address network access control and other kind of next generation segmentation technology in the data center? The 3 big ones that are out there are Cisco ISE, Identity Services Engine, and we have a couple different clients that we're actively deploying Cisco ISE in today. HP Aruba ClearPass, HPE Aruba ClearPass, which is based on their wireless 802.1x product, has been rolled out to provide both wired and wireless access, controlling 802.1x, and then Forescout Counteract. And this is, the 3 of these really have different approaches to how it's done in the marketplace. And we have a joint business relationship with HP Aruba ClearPass, and we have worked with HP Aruba and Forescout in doing evaluations and deployments in the field as well. There are a few other different solutions that are out there that are less flexible, and if you look at the way Gartner kind of lays them out in the marketplace, companies like Fort Knox, Bradford Networks, Extreme Networks, Juniper's Pulse Secure, etc. Any number of these products can address a lot of the issues, but the 3 leaders being Cisco ISE, Aruba Networks, and Forescout are the ones that we predominantly see people looking to deploy. Now let me talk a little bit about the differences between the 3 different products. Cisco ISE is predominantly deployed in Cisco environments, but it's not necessarily only has to be a Cisco environment. Cisco realizes that everybody out there is going to have the possibility of having non-Cisco equipment in their environment, so they do support non-Cisco equipment for doing 802.1 controls. The controls are different based on the classification of equipment and the vendor of the equipment, but they do support them. HP Aruba, with their ClearPass product, again, it's an offshoot of their original wireless management platform, but they, again, also support multiple vendors of equipment out there and support connecting into different kinds of back-end identity management. Forescout is the one player that's very different, is that they put a control inline. They put a hardware or virtual appliance that actually controls the data flow between the users and the data centers without relying on any kind of 802.1x controls. So if you've got a client that's got really old network equipment and they don't have the budget to go through and modernize it, or they have a situation where they have a lot of unmanaged switches that don't have the capability of doing .1x, then Forescout is the potential solution for them. Now, one of the things to point out is that all 3 solutions from the top 3 vendors have APIs that integrate with firewalls, that integrate with advanced threat defense, that integrate with SAM, that have the capability of supporting wired and wireless, and they also scale and integrate from itty-bitty little corporations with just a few thousand users to massive corporations with hundreds of thousands of users, and support BYOD. So any one of these top 3 solutions would be able to successfully protect both the edge and the data center segments.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think they also can support access to your VPN connections.
Yep. Go ahead and go on to the next slide, Austin. So there's a number of different components that go into a successful NAC and network segmentation implementation. There's the policy management and enforcement engine, which is typically the GUI that is provided by the different vendors for their environment. There's control into identity and access groups and things like that to provide the authentication, authorization, mapping to the policy. There's the endpoint devices themselves. providing that user segmentation, and that's any number of different kinds of devices. And those access control lists that we talked about before, the dynamic access control lists, or the ones that are inline based on using the Forescout platform, are put in place to block access. And then there's the data center itself with the different controls and different technologies that are put in there to control the traffic over there. Now, policy enforcement happens at the edge for endpoint devices. It happens at the quote-unquote edge as well inside the data center where the servers connect. You can consider that an edge port, but that's the east-west traffic in the data center that's controlled at one side, and the north-south traffic that's controlled at the endpoints at the other side. And again, all the policies are centrally managed typically through identity management. And that's tying into Active Directory, Oracle Identity Manager, LDAP, Radius, any number of different technologies that can be leveraged, ACS, etc. It's very flexible. All three top technology providers provide a very flexible solution that can be used to control the environment based on entity. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. So what we need to do when we come into an organization and talk to them about NAC and dynamic segmentation is look at what their entire environment looks like. What do they have as far as governance? What do they have as far as business process and standards and change management? What are their existing BYOD strategies? What's their desktop support methodology? Do they have well-established procedures and policies on paper that can then be turned into actual policy enforcement on the network using NAC and using 802.1x and segmentation? What are the prerequisites for doing this? Do we have to support 802.1x? Do we have to have what's called a change of authorization or change of authority support to be able to do this? No, it all depends on the particular vendor mix in the environment. It all depends on the particular solution that's been chosen to control the environment. And what are the dependencies? We need to understand the points of access control. We need to understand what kind of environment they have as far as virtualized to be able to support the controls in the virtual environment, which means the minimum of VMware 5 and up. We need to understand, do they have a mobile device management MDM platform for BYOD, for their users bringing their wireless devices in, or even their own wireless? Do they have a good understanding of who the users are, what the applications are, and how they're supposed to be accessing those things? And then again, what is the authentication methodology that they're going to use? What identity management platform do they have? We need to understand all of those things to be able to properly architect and then ultimately deploy and execute a successful NAC and segmentation program. That brings us to another quiz question. You can go ahead and go on to the next quiz and bring up the quiz. The question is, does implementing NAC and segmentation require a specific vendor's network equipment to be successful? True or false? Bobby, did you bring up the poll?
Yes. Can you see it?
Now I can, yes.
Looks like
I guess about a minute to talk about this, to answer the question. Javi, why don't you go ahead and publish the results and show us the answer?
Okay. The polling is closing 4 seconds ago. All right.
So the answer is false, obviously. We do not have to have a particular vendor's network equipment. Capabilities are different based on different vendors' equipment, but that does not mean we cannot leverage specific technologies or specific vendor solutions in the market to work around us. Now, once we understand an environment that a client's working in, we can go through and we can make recommendations based on capabilities that they're looking to employ, whether or not they need to go through any kind of network equipment upgrades, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have to go buy Cisco or HP or Arista or Juniper or anything. It's a multi-platform, multi-vendor environment. So moving on to the next one, we've got a couple more slides here, then we'll open up the call for questions. So what's involved in a NAC program? These programs can be long-term and are typically long-term with large organizations because a lot of discovery has to be done, a lot of architecture and fitting in the solution with their existing environment has to be done, and that's predominantly to make sure that we're not a disruptive technology in the corporation. We don't want to go in there and put controls in on day 2 and then all of a sudden have 2/3 of the organization not be able to do the day-to-day work. So what we typically do is we break this up into 3 different phases. We go through and we look at, do the analysis in the environment, develop the framework, the schedule, the technology architecture, the design, et cetera, for the first few months. Then we go into a proof of concept and pilot in the second phase where we ask IT typically to kind of eat their own dog food and deploy their own NAC and limit their own people to make sure that the controls that are being put in place are valid for the organization and they're not going to be doing any kind of disruption to day-to-day operation. And then phase 3 is typically a long period, or could be short if it's a small company, but it's the longest piece of the project where we're actually going through and making network equipment changes out in the field, adding them into the network access control system, creating those policies, enforcing those policies, and then getting the organization to a point where they have identity-based access control in both the data center and at the edge of the network. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. So what does that mean from a staffing point of view and engagement point of view? Typically, we have on-site staff for the first phase of the engagement. On the second phase, with a blend of onshore and offshore, and then on the third phase, it's heavily offshore and less onshore. Here are some examples of some of the roles that are typically identified, and this can be a mix of PwC and client roles. It can be all PwC, it could be all clients, and we can just be in there from a program management point of view. And the cost is obviously escalating as you go further into the program. There's more strategic work done in the beginning and more implementation work done in the end. And we can manage these programs from end-to-end, strategy through execution, as we like to say within PwC, either 90% hands-on with PwC and 10% of the client, or 90% of the client and 10% of PwC. It really can be a blend of what the client is willing or has the capability and the cycles to be able to do. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. So looking at the key questions to ask, we've put together a series of questions for you to ask your clients from a business, governance, IT, operations, and architecture point of view to help you really drive the message home to them. And just so everybody knows, a version of this deck, both this deck and a version that you can bring to clients, will be available after the end of this session and posted up to our IT infrastructure and segmentation Spark page. Some of the questions you're going to want to ask are around what their appetite for breach is, whether or not they have any kind of controls in place today, what they look like, what does the network environment look like, what kind of controls or regulatory controls, I should say, are they subject to, do they have the ability to absorb the capabilities do they have the ability to help deploy or manage an unarchitected solution along with PwC, and all those kinds of questions. So these are very important questions that you can ask your client to kind of get a good picture as to what their appetite and their capabilities are today. So moving on to our last and final poll question before we kind of run through a real quick history of what we've been doing with other clients. Avi, go ahead and open up the poll and go on to the next question. Next slide, I mean. So what clients should consider network access control and segmentation? Should it only be Fortune 500 or Fortune 50 clients? Should it only be clients that have regulatory concerns or have sensitive data? Or should really everybody consider NAC and segmentation? So let the polling question go for about a minute here, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, go ahead and share the poll results, and let's see the answer. Yes, absolutely. Everybody should be considering network access control. Awesome. Glad that everybody realizes that it's an important thing. From anybody who has PII or PCI data that has sensitive data, that has intellectual property, etc., it's important that everybody consider this. Now, how is PwC ICI uniquely qualified to support their clients? We have done this. That's the bottom line. We have done this for Fortune 50 organizations from a vendor-agnostic point of view. We've done it in the travel industry. We've done it in high tech. We've done it in healthcare. We've done it across the board. We have the understanding necessary from both the technical and business point of view to help build the strategy, do the designs, do the architectures, and do the deployment. We have the skills in the SEC today that are actively deploying network access control and segmentation solutions for clients today. And we have very effective people, process, and technology skills. We understand how these programs work. We understand what's important to clients. We have the accelerators and the tools and the templates and everything necessary to make these successful. And what's very interesting about PwC is that we're the only of the big four that are even trying to tackle this today. We have gone head-to-head in open bidding situations with clients where other big four consulting companies have said, we don't even do this, we don't even want to touch it. Even going out against other integrators and value-added resellers of ours, we've come in under budgets or under their budgets and very competitive at the rates. And because we have a vendor-agnostic point of view on all of this stuff, we can really come to this independently and say, this is what you really need to look for as far as equipment support or vendor support, versus if you have a vendor that comes in, for example, to come in and do a NAC solution based on their own platform. They're going to have their own interests at heart and are going to try to upsell the client as much as possible. We have done programs to the point where we have saved the client tens of millions of dollars in equipment upgrades because there was a design choice that was made by a particular vendor or design recommendation that, of course, would require them to replace a whole bunch of network gear. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. So here are some relevant qualifications applications. I'm not going to walk through these. Just to let you know, we have airlines, we have energy companies, we have pharmaceuticals, we have consumer retailers, we have lots of different industries we've looked at and done this work in. And then there's a couple slides here at the end where we've got planning tools and techniques and sample diagrams and things like that around how to put together these programs. And at this point, I'd rather than taking up the rest of the 15 minutes walking through all of these, I'd just like to open it up to everybody for questions. If there's any additional questions, you'll have access to this deck afterwards so you can look through the details on the relevant qualifications and the samples that we have. But at this point, are there any questions that we can answer for anybody? So the AT&T operator, can they go ahead and open up the line and unmute everybody so we can get people to ask questions? Or do you have a list of questions, Avi?
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to ask a question, please signal by pressing star 1 on your telephone keypad. If you're using a speakerphone, please pick up the handset before pressing the corresponding digits. You may remove yourself from the queue at any time by pressing the star key followed by the digit 2. Once again, that is star 1 if you'd like to ask a question. And we'll take our first question from Nilesh Brigade.
Hey, does the NAC come behind the firewall in DMZ, or is it like even inside the network? It's not even a part of DMZ.
So NAC goes basically everywhere there is a physical or logical network connection. So everywhere a device terminates, via wireless or VPN, there's a NAC control place. Anywhere a server connects, there is a NAC control place. Anywhere a firewall connects, there's a NAC control place. So it really becomes a distributed control throughout the environment, both inside the firewall and outside the firewall.
So yeah, let me just add to what Don just said. In terms of where you would install the NAC policy engine, for instance, really it depends on how your environment is set up. You don't have to put it behind the firewall. You can put your NAC policy engine in your data center, not necessarily behind the firewall. And the good thing is that you can integrate your NAC solution to your firewall. Your NAC policy engine can be a policy deployment point for your firewall. Well, that's really, it depends, that it makes you a little vendor, selected. For instance, Cisco firewalls will not integrate with an HP Aruba NAC solution, for instance. Cisco firewalls will only integrate with NAC, Cisco NAC solution.
But looking at the vendor support, for example, HP Aruba does integrate fully with Palo Alto firewalls. So there's nothing that says if you have Palo Alto firewalls protecting the perimeter of your data center, then you can't use the HP Aruba product to manage those policies dynamically and eliminate much of, if not most of, the static rules that are traditionally put in the perimeter of the data center. Now, not only because we're also controlling the network at multiple places throughout the entire environment, it eliminates the need for a lot of firewalls that organizations would traditionally think about. A lot of times a company would say, I want to create a DMZ for this application. I want to create a DMZ application. I want to create a DMZ for this application, or I want to control all these access to all these applications through sets of firewalls and firewall rules. You don't need to do that anymore if you leverage NAC inside the data center or secondary technologies like Cisco TrustX for a Cisco environment. But if you were to enable .1x at the server port, you can put the same kind of controls at the server port that you would typically have on a firewall, static port controls, and limit access to the user based on identity. And anybody who doesn't have an identification on the network wouldn't have access to it. So a lot of this supplants the necessary need for a bunch of firewalls in the environment. Do we have another question?
We'll take our next question from Jerry Curtis. Please go ahead. Your line is open. You may be on mute. Hearing no response, we'll now move on to our next question with Vinod Pillai.
Yes, hi. Could you please comment on whether
the segmentation securities could be extended to like a multi-tenant cloud application?
Absolutely, they can. Absolutely. that is one of the biggest advantages of now understanding who's connecting to your network and what kind of devices are connecting to the network, is that you can now extend that out into your own multi-tenant internal cloud or a virtual private cloud or a public cloud. There are a number of different solutions provided from AWS, from Amazon, AWS, from Azure, from Google Compute Engine, to be able to provide tie-in to these identity-based controls and be able to control access to that. Now, when you're talking about a pure software solution, software as a solution platform that's accessible publicly via some sort of web interface, there are some tricks that you can do to provide additional controls of that, but you have to work very closely with that vendor. For example, if you wanted to limit access to Salesforce.com from the outside, you would have to work with Salesforce.com to put in a B2B connection and funnel all that traffic in through your own internal network, and then put the controls at the edge connecting to Salesforce.com inside your network to be able to control them. Because obviously, clients don't have access to what Salesforce.com does internal to their network. We can't put controls internal to our network. We have to put the controls where their network touches our network.
Once again, as a reminder, that's star one if you'd like to ask a question. And I'll take our next question from Dustin Ellis. Caller, we are unable to hear you. Please check your mute function.
Yes. I was wondering about the switching costs with these platforms. If a client went with Aruba and then decided to switch over to a different NAC solution, what would that process be like? And also, how in terms of maintenance and updating these NAC solutions, what is typically required?
So the platforms themselves for a 5-year life cycle typically are $1 to $2 per endpoint on large scale, and they can obviously grow in cost if it's a smaller environment. So we're talking about an environment where there's a couple thousand servers and 10 to 20,000 users. You're looking at about a $1 to $2 endpoint solution cost or protection cost. Because it's a centrally managed and maintained platform, obviously patches and policy updates are all done internally, and the maintenance contract that you would normally do for any kind of other network appliance or application would be applied. So we normally would have a 5-year support contract associated with any of the different NAC solutions, so that software patches and updates and stuff like that come along with it. Now, when you're looking at specific vendors that are leveraging appliance or virtual appliance, physical or virtual appliances, a little bit different of a support model, because you might have to change out equipment if there's a significant growth in the network in a particular area. So there might be additional hidden costs there. Does that answer your question?
So I tried to put a new tube in there.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next question from Gary Curtis.
Hi. In terms of the cost for implementation, what are some of the factors? It looked like, I'm just kind of doing back of the napkin thing, but it looked like it was sort of $700,000 for phase one, given the staffing you have there. What drives cost in terms of implementation?
A couple of things drive cost for this. One is participation from the client, and two is documentation of their existing environment. As we all know, time to time when we go into an environment where the client just really doesn't have their environment documented, they don't know what they have, they don't have well-documented policies and procedures, and so we would a lot of time spend time up front doing a lot of that work for them. The typical first phase, that architectural design, is somewhere in the $200,000 to $800,000 range. It all depends on the amount of participation and completeness of their documentation. It can be significantly lower than that if all we're going to do is come in as a program management point of view and drive that. Obviously, we have pretty fixed costs when it comes to that, coming in as a single person and helping out driving a program. But if we have to bring in SMEs to be able to do the detailed design and detailed architecture and detailed business requirements, it's obviously going to be far more expensive. Programs dependent on equipment, on support, on staffing, on profiling, all that kind of stuff, over the life of a project could range anywhere from $500,000 to $5 to $10 million for size of an organization.
Yeah, so Don, do you also want to address, the dependency cost, from an infrastructure point of view, like, the AD, IDM, and the likes of it?
And a lot of times when we're going through and doing these kinds of programs, we start to uncover a lot of other work that needs to be done to clean up the environment from an IDM point of view, from a certificate authority point of view, from a network management platform point of view, from lifecycle management point of view, from architecture and technology review boards and governance. A lot of these things start getting uncovered as we go in. Somebody will say, oh, yeah, we've got a very well-vetted network management platform, and we have a great ARB, and we really understand our policies. And then when we sit down and say, this is what you need to be able to do this, they soon discover that maybe their environment isn't as strong as they thought it was.
Thank you. It did, and then one little follow-up question. You had said it was about $1 per device. Is that a capital cost or an annual cost around supporting the environment? Like if you implement this, what's...
So that's a licensing cost associated with the endpoint protection. So that's not an implementation cost, and that's not an operational cost as far as managing the platform itself. Typically, these are deployed in small clusters of 2 to 6 servers. Just like any other server in the environment, the annualized operational cost for 2 to 6 servers is pretty predictable for most organizations. The policy editing is typically taken over by somebody within a security or network organization. And once you've established that steady state policy, going back and revisiting the policies is not a big task. Once you establish the groups within Active Directory or Oracle IAM or whatever identity management platform you're going to do, managing the addition of the users into those groups is no different than going through and dragging and dropping users into groups when they're created the very first time. There's a large upfront cost. There's an ongoing small cost associated with maintenance of the users and the licensing. And then there's very little actual operational cost associated with it because it all becomes kind of built into the existing processes, and it's just one extra small step to be able to manage and maintain those security groups.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. We'll now take our next question from Bhavik Pandya.
Hi. I'm wondering if there is any downtime associated with implementing the NAC solution at the client side?
So there can be downtime if there has to be a firmware update or a hardware swap. But typically when we're doing the controls and putting the configurations in place, the first phase is to do what's called a fail open or a monitor mode, where activity is just managed, and then we change into a fail closed mode where actually activity is controlled. And unless you didn't map your policy correctly, there shouldn't be any actual downtime transitioning from the fail open to the fail closed. So prepping for it, there might be a little bit if you have to do upgrades and hardware swaps, but actually deploying it, there shouldn't be.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is an overlay technology. This goes over the top of an existing network. It doesn't require the company to go through and re-IP the entire network, to go through and create 500 new VLANs and readdress everybody and move everybody into new VLANs. This is an identity-based control that is based on the user and the device they're using. It doesn't make a difference what VLAN it's in. You could even, and nobody ever recommends this, but you could even have one big massive VLAN and subnet with every device in the entire organization and have the same fine-grained security controls as somebody who has 500 VLANs and 500 different kinds of networks in their environment. And so it really plays well into providing controls for companies who haven't been prepared and haven't done any kind of segmentation of any kind up to date. Next question.
It appears there are no further questions in the queue at this time.
Awesome. So we're just about up at the top of the hour here. Thank everybody for joining. We'll put the copy of this presentation up on the brown bag page that we see on the screen here. We also have a network segmentation page that that you can go on Spark to get access to this and some other materials. Avi, if you want to go ahead and bring up the for more information slide there, the next one. If you guys have any questions, reach out to myself, reach out to Benga, reach out to Tim or Jerry. We have developed this offering cross-vertical HIA, FS, SIPs, TICE. So we're ready to go out to market to help anybody else. And like I said, we've done this before, and we're continuing to do it now. And we'd love to help your clients build out some real security capability and protect themselves in the future. Thanks again, everybody, for joining, and we hope you join us.
One more thing. If you do want us to kind of come to your client to have this presentation, please do reach out to us.
Yes.
And also the recording will be on the link as well.
Yes. We're happy to have this discussion with your clients one-on-one. Typically, we reserve about an hour to kind of do an overview of a program, just to kind of get their feet wet as to what's going on, and then we can have further discussions with them around what the strategy would be short-term and long-term for them putting in a NAC and segmentation program. All right, very much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. That does conclude our conference for today. Thank you for your participation and for using AT&T Teleconference Service.